Hey guys, I'm Josh Smitherman, and in this video, we're going to whip up a sugar shaker. This was my first signature pattern with Umpqua, and it's been great. Got 3 color patterns out. This isn't one of them. This is a crawfish version, but it's a little bit more complicated, and it takes a few more steps, so we're going to go through this version, and I'll explain how to do the others. But first, we're going to start off with a 10 millimeter shank. This is one that I just made myself, but the Flyman shanks are great for this. That's what I use the time on. I'm going to just use some olive thread here. This is A. Vivus. It's not extremely important because I'm not going to do most of my time with it. I'm just kind of laying my thread base down with it. Go ahead and finish that, and I'm going to switch to this is a GSP and a 100 denier. It's a whole lot easier to use this. Not 100% necessary, but in the long run, it makes things easier. Okay, so this pattern, it's mainly spun rabbit. But I'm going to start out with just a little bit of fluorescent orange rabbit. And I'm going to just cut a clump of hair off the hide. And this is something I only do on crawfish variations. If I was tying my brown trout version or my sculpin or whitey, I never include this pattern or this step in that pattern. I'm going to just tie in almost at full length. Nice big clump here. Trim off these butt ends. And I try to trim them at an angle, that way I have a nice flat surface to tie them on, and it's not a steep drop off where I cut the rabbit. There we are. Now I'm going to take one of these magic tools, and this is just the regular size. It comes with 2. It comes with a smaller and a larger one. I'm going to take a strip of, this is black barred olive variant. I'm going to put the hide in the smaller clip. I'm going to pull all those fibers up. I'm going to take my larger clip, capture those. Just kind of slide that up to the tip. Take my smaller clip off. And then I can come in here and cut my rabbit at whatever length I want it, which is this first shank. I'm roughly about half length. There we go. So that's what I want there. Now you can always use a dubbing loop here, but I prefer splitting my thread just because it's a little less bulk and a little easier to finish off the fly. So I split my thread. This is why I use GSP here, because it doesn't really break. I'm going to insert the butt ends of that hair in here. Make sure they're all lined up right. I'm going to just give my bobbin a twist. Let those spin up. Nice and tight so that those aren't going to come out. I can just come in here and make sure no hairs are trapped. Usually these first few shanks aren't. But now I'm going to just take this rabbit and we're just going to wrap it up. Just kind of palmer it as you go all the way up to the eye of this shank here. I'm going to unspin my thread, that way it's easier to whip finish. Try to get it flat again. There we are. We'll go ahead and whip finish here. And I always use white GSP just because it takes marker really well. So if you wanted to take an olive marker, you can just hit it. There you go. Not 100% necessary, you won't really see it that much, but it's definitely something that's easy to do. Then I like to take a little bit of UV and just coat the front here with my thread. Just because these things take a little while to tie, and the last thing you want to happen is your thread to bust. All right, so there's our smallest shank. Next, we're going to use a 15 millimeter, and then we're going to go to the 20 millimeter. So in total, our tail is going to look like this here. Go ahead and throw that guy in there. And then I always keep a rubber band, and this is great for any articulated flies you do. Always keep a rubber band on my vise, that way I can hook it into that little loop. Keeps that back. Great if you have a second hook or a trailer hook. I don't know how many times I've been stabbed. That kind of fixes that for the most part. All right, I'm gonna take my olive thread again. Lay down a thread base on this shank. Really cover up those because they're very sharp. And they'll cut your thread. Which on the flyman shanks, you only have the one to worry about, but when you make your own, sometimes there's more than one. Come up here and cover this one up. There we go. All right, whip finish. And we will switch to GSP again. I always use a razor blade to cut GSP just because it's so tough, it's hard to do with scissors. All right, so now we're gonna kind of repeat the process with the rabbit. I'm gonna take another hide, insert it into this smaller clip, pull all the hair forward, or up, I guess, and we'll use the bigger clip. Capture. There we are. And again, I like to, it depends on the rabbit how much you trim this here. You can do the same length and go about half the same length as the hair on the 10 millimeter shank, or you can make it a little bit longer. To me, it all depends on what length of rabbit I get. If the hair is really long on the strips, I'll step them up on each. If it's pretty short, I'll do the first and second shank about the same length. I'll insert that clip of hair. Again, we're going to spin this up. Now this shank is going to take 2. Sometimes it even takes 2.5. It just depends how thick the rabbit is as well. Usually about every 5 millimeters is going to take another clip of hair, is kind of the general rule I've found. Again, I'm going to make sure no hairs are trapped. And we'll palmer this up. And try to get those wraps nice and tight. We're trying to throw as much of this rabbit on here as we can. That way it keeps its shape. There we go. You do have to let this unwind and get flat again. Now you could always just wrap these up with the hide still on it, just palmer the hide. I never do. First of all, because it kind of messes the taper up. You don't get that change in the length of the hair. Still swims just fine. But I think the profile is not quite as good. And then also you have a lot of added weight from the leather. Whereas you take off the leather here and spin it, you don't have the added weight, plus you have more movement to it and a better overall shape. So I think it's worth doing, but it does take a lot longer. But I will say these things don't fall apart. They are pretty resilient when it comes to being fished. The most I've had happen is, a pair of lead eyes will pop off eventually, but that's always an easy fix. Make sure these are going to be the same length as the strip already put on there. Twist that up again. And hopefully this will take us up to the eye. If not, we'll add another half a strip or so. I'm just going to pick up right where we left off with that last strip. Nice tight wraps. I'm going to add a little bit more. It's not quite half a strip, but I'm going to add a little bit just to finish this shank off here. All right, twist that up. thread untwist here. We can go ahead and whip finish. Hit it with a little marker and then a little UV resin. And whatever UV resin you want to use here, this is just, this is Gulf. I really like Gulf resin, but there's a ton of different stuff out there that's also really good. So you can use super glue or whatever you want to use there. Now I'm just going to throw on the 20mm shank. And this will be the last one for our tail. I'll kind of complete that game changer style tail there. Again, I'm going to use my Beavis thread here. Get my thread base, cover up my sharp points on these shanks. All right. More rabbit. Now this shank, I'm definitely going to add a little bit of length to my rabbit fibers here, because you want that, you want the tail to taper down. I'm not going to make these full length because we'll do that on the actual hook, but I am going to have these, roughly at least 3/4 full length, maybe even a little bit more. And for splitting thread, these Tiemco needles are awesome because they have that nice thick needle that is super sharp, so it splits it really easily, and then it spreads it because it's thick, so it's pretty awesome. I would definitely recommend. And a well-balanced bobbin also really comes in handy. There's a lot of those out there, but something with a little weight to it that is very, uniform and doesn't have curves to it. I use also Tiemco bobbin, the double arm. They're pricey, but they are very nice. Probably one of the nicest bobbins I've used. I'm gonna just come through and pick out hair. You start to get a little bit of trapped hair since the length's getting a little longer here. And we'll start palmering this forward. And again, this usually takes about 3 clips of rabbit. To get the right amount on there. Let that unspin while I get more rabbit. I will say this flag, you can tie this in so many different colors. I don't even know how many different colors I've tied it in, because your main things are rabbit, sinews, and marabou. And there's a ton of different colors in all three of those products, so you can mix and match and really cover your options. But I've made all sorts of variations over the years, and still one of my favorites is the whitey and the sculpin. You know, being from Texas, I don't do a whole lot of trout, so the brown trout doesn't come into play too much. I definitely use it a good bit, but not near as much as the whitey and the sculpin, and like the crawfish variations like this. This is going to be a good one for me to have in the box for this spring, because spring in Texas is just crawfish. That's all you need to know. Try to split that thread as evenly as possible when you're putting this in, because one weak side, and that is how you break it, and that's always a pain. Now it's a little uneven. There we go. All right, this should be the last strip. I believe that'll be the right amount. There we are. I forgot to mention, but this fly, I tie this in a size 2 and a size 6. And the difference in the two, I like to tie the size 6 with squirrel instead of rabbit. It's just a little shorter material. You don't have the color options as much, but it really shortens down the length, and it makes a good looking fly. But I'll also only do 2 shanks in the size 6, and then obviously the size 6 hook's a lot different than a 2. And then I will forego some other materials that I put on the hook and just throw the squirrel on there. But I'll tie it with rabbit every now and then as well, and it's still a good bit smaller than the 2. Being that you knock out the 20 millimeter shank here and the smaller hook. And I like to fish those in the creeks and smaller stuff like that. It works really well. All right. So that's just our tail here. So pretty large fly, but it has caught some great fish. This is always my go-to streamer when I'm going for big bass. And this thing has caught some really nice trout too. Throw 2 finishes on this fly here, or on this shank, because this one does get a little bit more wear and tear than the other shanks do. Okay, and then with these longer shanks, I like to come through and kind of pick out. Don't pick it super hard because you don't want to hit your thread and pull your thread, but just kind of go through and get any rabbit that's trapped under itself from palmering. Helps it stick out and lay back a little bit better. But that's our tail. So you can see there's a nice little taper to it all the way down to the tip there, which again, if this wasn't a crawfish, it would be like that. I'm not going to throw that tuft of rabbit out the back for any of the fish species of or variations. I'm going to leave that tail sticking down to the side, and we're going to tie on a B10S. Again, this is a size 2 hook here. Throw that in the vise. And then I'm going to put on these double pupil lead eyes. These are a large, black with I think it's a fluorescent green or fluorescent chartreuse. Don't have the package for those, but we're going to start with that Vivas thread, lay down a little thread base. You don't want to use GSP here because it's a really slick thread. It's really strong, but it's really slick. And you just can't really get the eyes to sit tight. They'll end up spinning around the hook. Or you could possibly just cut through them. I've done that before. All right, I'm gonna leave about a hook eye width in between my lead eyes and the hook eye. That way you have room to tie in some dubbing. If you don't tie on dumbbell eyes very often, one of the best tips I can give you is do a certain number of wraps one direction. I do roughly 10. I'll come back and do 10 the other direction, get them nice and straight. And then you do what you know, your helicopter wraps where you kind of come under the lead eyes and over the hook. And that's what really sets the eyes in and keeps them locked in pretty tight. And just for good measure, I'd do it twice. I'll go another 10. Same with the other direction. And then also with these wraps here. Okay, so once those eyes are on, I'll go ahead and lay down the thread base. All the way to about the bend of the hook. Then I'm going to throw on some wire. So I use this stuff. It's American fishing wire, Surflon. I bought it so long ago. I have no idea what size it is or anything like that. But it works great. But any articulation wire works great too. I've used definitely plenty of different substitutes. And it's not like there's a hook on that tail, so it doesn't have to be extremely strong. Just want something that's not going to fall apart, after a year or two. So I'm going to get wire on there, and I'm going to take 2 medium beads, medium glass beads. I use these Killer Caddis beads. I'm going to run the wire through those. I'm going to get my articulated tail. Take that wire through the tail, back through those beads. There we are. And I want roughly, a bead width between the last bead and the hook eye, or the shank eye. And what I will tie a little bit into the bend just because I want the hook shank and the wire to be even. That way, everything's in line. And I'm not going to really worry about keeping these too long because they're not going to come out. I'm going to glue them down just for reassurance, but just take some wire cutters or some really dull old scissors. Cut that wire. Again, this would probably never come out, but just for some reassurance, take a little super glue. And I'll coat that. And now I'm very confident that won't be pulled out. Wrap over any of that glue that hadn't dried yet. Okay, so I'm not going to switch to GSP yet. I will. We'll switch back to GSP, then we'll switch back to Vivus one more time. But we're not going to switch yet. What I'm going to do is tie in some marabou. So I'm going to use this MFC barred marabou. This is in an olive and brown bar. They got a bunch of different types of these. You can use regular marabou too. I just like the barring in here. Kind of keeps with that barring in the rabbit, that nice mottled look. But I'm going to use 2 of these feathers. I'm going to set one on bottom and I'll set one on top. And this is just to fill the gap, between the hook and the tail here. And I want this roughly, the length of that longest shank there. we are. And I'm tying these in right where, you know, the bend of the hook is. So there will be some exposed thread. It'll be covered up by this marabou, but it's not right where you tied in the wire. It's a little before then. And with this barred stuff, I try to line these bars up. I just think it looks a little bit better. Not super important, but the OCD in me just wants me to line them up. Once those are tied in, come in. This is just kind of a rough trim here. Cut those stems off. And I like to come in here and trim these kind of at an angle. That way there's a nice ramp. Just makes tying in material much easier. I'm going to go ahead and tie these down. Make sure that's all nice and even down to the hook shank. There we go. Go ahead and switch threads. So whip finish with the Vivas here. And we're back to the gel spun. And honestly, you could tie in the feathers with the gel spun too. That's not a problem. But the gel spun stuff's a lot more expensive and it's easier to tie in stuff usually with the Vivas, so always wait. Okay, so we're gonna split our thread again and add more rabbit. But we're almost done with that. All right, now this strip here, I'm gonna cut this at full length. I'm gonna get as close to the hide as I can. Because again, we're trying to create a nice taper to the fly. There we go. There we are. Again, make sure everything's kind of even. The less you have on, you know, this side of the thread here, the less bulk you have. So getting that pretty close to the thread. You still want enough that the thread grabs the hair, but you don't want too much. You can see how this longer rabbit is really wanting to twist up on itself. Once you've got that locked in there, you just come through and pick it out. And we'll palmer this forward. Again, touching wraps, just like on the shanks. There we go. Gonna let that unspin there. Go ahead and pick out some of this because there's a few trapped pieces in there. Just come in here and pull out any fibers of that hair. Make sure they're all out straight. I'm going to come through and just really tighten down. There we are. All right, we're getting there. Next up, UV polar chenille. This is in a UV pearl. I always use UV pearl here. I never throw in any colored chenille. You can, but I don't like a whole lot of flash on this fly. And this is a really subtle flash because I sandwich it between some rabbit. So it really serves two purposes. One, you get that little bit of flash. Two, it's one less rabbit strip you got to put in, which is always positive. I'm going to make usually 4 wraps is what I'm looking for, but it depends how far down you've gone with the rabbit in relation to the eyes here, because you still got to put in another strip of rabbit there. And you know, your fins or legs, and a little bit of dubbing. So I think that's our stopping point there. So it doesn't take a whole lot at all. Pull back any fibers that are going forward. I wrap back a little bit just to make sure everything's, you know, pushed back. And then last strip. I promise. Again, we're cutting this as close to the height as we can. Now, I will say that the rabbit's probably going to grab some of the chenille and try to twist it up. So after you get one good spin in there, just come through with your needle, pluck out anything. That's like a first. That time it actually didn't grab one. Well, there goes one. Just, you know, every time you spin it up a little bit more, go through and pick it out. Marabou kind of does the same thing. There we go. Come in and straighten out my rabbit hair. This clump tangled up pretty bad. There we go. All right. And again, right on top of each other with the wraps here. Want them touching. Try to take the least amount of space we can here with this one. Gonna leave ourselves. That's a good bit of room there, actually. So I have about probably not quite maybe a hook eye's width, probably not quite a hook eye's width behind those lead eyes. And that's plenty of space. Once that GSP thread unspins, a couple nice tight wraps, and then whip finish there. You can go ahead and switch threads. I'm going to pick this stuff out. There we go. All right. So now this is the other part where the crawfish patterns and the fish patterns differ. So, you know, you have the little clump on the tail here. I only put that in the crawfish patterns or variations. And then I like to throw in rubber legs for the crawfish. If I was doing, say I was doing, you know, an olive sculpin color here, which, you know, if I didn't put the orange in, I could still do that here. I throw in, this is, you know, Brahma hen, just a Brahma hen saddle. These feathers make great pectoral fins. I'll go ahead and tie them on, kind of show you how I do it. And I'll just take them off and I'll throw on the rubber legs. So I'll take two feathers, kind of put them, line up the tips on them. Once you got those tips lined up, grab the feather, and then just peel back, you know, however long you want that feather. Peel back all the downy fibers on it. You really just want that right there. So, again, we'll start our thread here. So all I'd have to do for the pectoral fins here, that there. And I don't tie those in super tight right away. I kind of do loose wraps over them. That way I can still position them. But you just want one on each side, and you want these things as even, you know, directly out the sides as you can. And then you just trim the stems, get a couple tight wraps, just to make sure. And then what I like to do is I'll get a Flex UV resin and just coat, you know, maybe that first quarter of the feather right there where you tie it in. Just keeps that tying point strong. They don't turn or twist on you. They stay where you want them to. And then you just go on to the next step. But for the crawfish, I'm going to tie in rubber legs. So there's a ton of different rubber legs out there. I like these sight cast legs. They're marsh legs is what they're called. This is a clear and chartreuse with an olive tip. Again, I use a lot of different legs for these, but these look pretty good. So I'm going to take 3 legs, fold them over, and just tie those in right on the side. Again, same place we tied in the feathers, just right on that side. And do the same thing on the other. 3 legs. I'll fold them over. So now I have 6 out that side. I like to wrap them around the eye just so I know that I'm tying it directly on that side. There we are. There we go. So a lot of legs hanging out there. And I'll come in, grab that loop there in the back, and you can just trim those. Just make sure all those little tag ends there are tied down nice and tight so that they don't slip out on you at any point. There we are. We'll go ahead and trim those at the end. But for now, on to the next step. So I'm gonna add in laser dub. A lot of different colors. You can mix them up and make, other colors. I'm gonna be using a light olive on the belly and then just regular olive on top. There's not a huge difference, but there is a slight difference. So I'm gonna take a small clump like this here, just pull out a clump, and you wanna align all the fibers. So you just take them at, pull it at each end, pull them out. You'll see nice straight fibers here. Just stack them on each other. So all your fibers are nice and straight there. You ought to be able to pinch it in the middle. You can pull out anything on the edges. But there you are. That's what we're looking for. So I'm going to start right here behind the eyes. Tie it right in the middle. Just like that there. I'm going to flip it over. I'm going to do the exact same thing here with the olive. So this is light olive on the bottom. Put that little bit darker color on top. And you can always, manipulate these fibers to help cover the hook there if you need to. So this back end, you're really just trying to cover up the tie-in point of, either the feather or the legs. And then we'll tie in more dubbing in front, and that'll make more of the shape and the bulk. But once you've got that where you want it, make a couple nice tight wraps, fold everything back, take your thread in front of the lead eyes. And we're gonna repeat that process. Again, little clump of sinews. It doesn't have to be too much. Honestly, less fish is better. More looks a little bit better, but less usually fish is better. Clump of light olive on the bottom. There's the regular olive right there on top. Try to round that hook a little bit there. Fold those back. And I'm going to do one more. Right there behind the hook eye. And this is where a lot of times I'll switch to a little bit darker, like I thought about putting sculpin olive in here for the front, kind of make a little bit darker head. It kind of transitions nicely into the body, but I'm going to just hit it with a marker, make it a little bit darker. That's one good thing about sinew is it takes a marker really well. But a lot of times I'll throw in a different color right here at the end. Get some nice tight wraps there. Again, we'll fold it back. Get your thread right behind your hook eye. That Vivas thread likes to squeak. Then we'll just whip finish. There we are. And I like to brush this out because you will have some fibers that come out. I usually brush them straight up, try to get out anything that isn't really tied in. And this is also a great point if you wanted to. We'll see, I got quite a bit of sinews there that wasn't tied in. Just filler that I didn't need. But this is a great point if you wanted to make these, you know, the head a little bit shorter. You could come in here, pinch that sinews here, and pull, and it'll shorten it if you need it to. But then you can just kind of, there we go. Comb all this back, brush it all back. Then I like to take a little bit of UV resin. And I'm going to just coat my thread here on the front and a little bit of the dubbing, just the very front of it. It just helps it lay back a little bit. There we go. There we are. And again, if I wanted to make the front a little bit darker, take a marker. Or I could bar it if I wanted to, something like that. Or you could just tie in a different color of sinews or blend them. There's a lot of options you can do there. I've done all sorts of stuff for it. It all looks pretty good. Kind of comb that in. There we are. I'll come in and trim my legs. I like my legs to be about the length of the marabou. It doesn't have to be perfect. You know, all rubber legs. They're going to be going everywhere anyway, so. There we are. And then last step, I'd just come in and trim that little hook on the back end of the tail there that rubber band's on. Just one less thing to get caught fishing. But that's it. That's a sugar shaker.